Have you ever thought about how much goes into every decision you make? What makes people behave the way they do? Well, a lot of factors affect how we act: our personalities, past experiences, beliefs, but one of the most influential is our environment, specifically the people around us. When looking at men, the idea of toxic masculinity comes to mind, and it has a large presence on our lives, whether we realize it or not. Generally speaking, it's the set of harmful beliefs around the way men should behave. The definition I'll be using is from psychiatrist Terry A. Coopers, who, in the Journal of Clinical Psychology, defines toxic masculinity as the constellation of socially regressive male traits that serve to foster domination, the devaluation of women, homophobia, and wanton violence. The movies Y Tu Mamá También and Moonlight are two examples of how toxic masculinity extends into cinema. In Y Tu Mamá También, we follow a pair of male best friends, Tenoch and Julio, in their sexual pursuit of Luisa. In Moonlight, the narrative revolves around Chiron, the gay protagonist as he battles his identity and societal expectations. Both Y Tu Mamá También by Alfonso Cuarón and Moonlight by Barry Jenkins exhibit toxic masculinity through wanton violence, the devaluation of women, and domination. Because cinema is often a reflection of society, it's important to consider how men are portrayed through film and the harmful implications that toxic masculinity has on male development. The first pillar of toxic masculinity is wanton violence, or violence that's excessive and unjustified. Let's take a look at this clip from Y Tu Mamá También after Tenoch admits to sleeping with Julio's girlfriend, and you'll see what I mean.
Bájate, cabrón, que nos vamos a partir la madre, güey.
¡Tu madre, cabrón!
¡Abre, puto!
Oye, chicos, ya.
¡Abre, cabrón!
¡Vete a la... Clásico! A huevo, te tenía que salir lo pinche nacote, güey.
Pues este pinche naco te va a partir toda tu madre, cabrón.
¡Me la pelas, naco, me la pelas!
¡Bájate, cabrón!
¡Chinga tu madre, güey!
¡Julio de mierda!
¡A la verga!
¡Bájale, güey!
¡Naco, me la pelas, naco!
While it'd be normal for someone to be angry if their partner cheated on them with their best friend, Julio's actions are still extreme and unnecessarily aggressive, banging and spitting on the door, all while cussing out Tenoch. And not to invalidate his feelings, but it's also important to mention that Julio had slept with Tenoch's girlfriend as well, so it's not like he's the only one who's being wronged. At the end of the scene, Julio pushes Luisa, a bystander who hasn't done anything. Although both Tenoch and Luisa end up fine, Julio's natural reaction being so overly physical suggests men's kind of inclination towards violent behavior that can be extreme and uncalled for. In Moonlight, Kevin and Chiron are the ones who commit acts of violence. The following conversation happens right before Chiron is assaulted.
Nah, but you remember in middle school that game we used to play? Knock down, stay down?
Yeah, yo, my crazy ass was the king of that shit.
Yeah, I remember. Yo, you remember that white kid you fucked up?
The Cuban cat, right? Mauricio or something?
Oh, yeah. Yo, you fucked that kid face up. Yo, we was calling you Tyson after that shit.
In this scene, we can see how Kevin and Terrell fondly reminisce about a game where the objective is to hurt people, seemingly without reason. Terrell's reaction to Kevin messing up a kid's face indicates how he sees hurting other people as funny and something to almost be proud of. Now, look at Terrell's reaction when Kevin agrees to swing on whoever he arbitrarily picks.
All right. All right, Cap. Let me see who has getting dropped today.
He's dapping Kevin up and smiling, which demonstrates how happy he is to be able to hurt someone, and ultimately leads Kevin and the rest of Terrell's group to assault Chiron. Here, Terrell portrays senseless violence as the norm, as things people should be doing but don't anymore, and he uses Kevin to target Chiron for no reason other than not liking him. I also want to reiterate that both Kevin and Chiron did this wearing blue shirts, after having worn white shirts the day prior. In the movie, it's the first time Chiron, who usually wears white or red, it's the first time he's wearing a blue shirt, which is a clear hint that masculinity is associated with excessive violence. In both films, the scenes we've looked at characterize men as stereotypically violent and convey how, when encountered by a situation, or even when there's no situation, men default to violence. Although the characters may have motives, the actual violence is unexcused and excessive, an indicator of toxic masculinity and how physically dangerous it can be. The next pillar of toxic masculinity is the devaluation of women, which is done through language and sexualization. In Y Tu Mamá También, there are various examples of this, like when Julio and Tenoch are masturbating together by the pool, which I'm not going to show, but The boys are basically naming girls and mentioning sexual organs. In essence, they're kind of depreciating the girls they talk about down to sexual objects that they can just jerk off to. As further evidence, take a look at the following scene where Saba, Tenoch, and Julio are all smoking together.
No mames, no mames. ¿Qué viene tachadito, güey? Puta, si va a la Miriam, la voy a agarrar de sus orejitas. Me la voy a coger. Oye, esa mierda está re buena. Me tiró todo el calzón, güey. Acá me pasaba sus nalguitas de una manita bien cachada. La neta, sí, qué puta, güey. Güey, ahora que me quiero chingar es a la novia del Sazón, güey. No tiene unas chichitas de tapadito.
The boys are talking about girls they'd want to have sex with and reducing them down to their sexual organs. Furthermore, they use words like babe, slutty, chick, which belittle women and sound especially insulting, considering the context surrounding the conversation. It's not hard to see how the boys are devaluing women. In Moonlight, women are depicted in a similar fashion. Throughout the film, characters will use words like bitches or hoes to refer to women, indicating how men use language to degrade women. A better example to see how men view women in the film is through Kevin.
Ames called me with this trick in the stairway. Yeah. Who? Damn, you nosy, nigga. Nah, I'm playing, yo. Look, I just wanted some quick head, you know? But this chick all like, hit that shit, Kevin. Hit it with that big dick. Like, why she gotta compliment a nigga for? So I'm like, shit, we can do this, you know? So I started banging the back out, dog. I'm banging the back out. She wanna make all this fucking noise, though. So Ames coming acting like 5-0 and shit, almost had my ass suspended, dog.
When Kevin talks about the girl he just hooked up with, he calls her chick and trick, which is another word for hoe. Kevin talks about wanting some quick head before proceeding to imitate the sex he had with the girl, demonstrating how Kevin only saw the girl as a means of sexual pleasure. In addition, he talks in this kind of annoyed and vain tone, indignant that this chick almost got him suspended because she was making too much noise. It feels as if he's saying, it feels as if he wants to say, shut up, I don't really care what you have to say. Like, in his opinion, she should only be there for his pleasure and for him to feel good about himself. In both films, there's an overt focus on the sexual aspects of women. Men don't view them as people, but sexual objects for their own pleasure and will use depersonalized terms like chick or bitch. In other words, the male characters have demeaning attitudes towards women, both implying the presence of toxic masculinity and the societal impact toxic masculinity can have on women. The third pillar of toxic masculinity is domination, which is visible through how the male characters compete with each other and try to establish each other as inferior. Now, if we remember the scene where Julio was banging on the car door, there's something I didn't show you. Right after Luisa gets pushed, she lashes out, quite reasonably, comparing the men to animals and saying this.
Como todos los tíos, marcando territorio y dándos de hostias cuando lo único que os gustaría sería follar el uno con el otro.
In her eyes, it's normal that men are territorial and compete with each other like animals, trying to assert their superiority in this kind of uncivilized way. And the cattle in the background accompanied by animal sounds are no coincidence. Another instance of how men try to prove their superiority is when Luisa asks if the boys have ever slept with girls other than their girlfriends.
Oye, ¿me contáis una cosa? ¿Habéis hecho el amor con muchas chicas además de vuestras novias?
¿Con alguna?
Este güey, cabrón.
¿Qué?
Este cabrón no ha cogido más que con su vieja, ¿no?
No es cierto, güey.
¿Y con quién, puto?
Con Flavia, cabrón.
Ay, no mames, con Flavia, güey. Mira, a Flavia, este cabrón, se estaba poniendo el condón y justo se lo estaba poniendo y se vino. Tú me contaste, güey.
And continuing after that scene, Tenoch similarly declares to have slept with 2 to 3 other girls, but Julio plays down his story, adding in that they were whores, which Tenoch denies, despite proudly declaring their fidelity when Luisa first asked if the charolastras were faithful. They quickly reveal the truth to appeal to Luisa and seem more commanding. It feels like the boys are trying to one-up each other by claiming they've had more sexual conquests, something that's usually praised between men. In addition, they're both detracting from the other's story, trying to establish the other as inferior in an attempt to prove their own dominance. And just to point out the importance of color once again, for the first time in the film, both boys are wearing blue shirts, communicating how the competitive nature between men is almost intrinsic. Furthermore, the appearance of the blue shirt is almost always accompanied by an attempt to appear superior, indicating masculinity's relationship with wanting to appear dominant. For example, when Julio says he loves to travel, appealing to Luis's likes of traveling despite barely having traveled himself. Or when Julio admits to sleeping with Tenoch's mom as the ultimate kind of one-up. And finally, at the end of the film, where Julio insists on paying the bill in order to feel level with Tenoch despite their difference in class. In Moonlight, although less explicit, male characters express a similar drive to appear strong or more powerful than other characters. One example is Terrell, who constantly picks on Chiron. By regularly degrading and physically intimidating Chiron, he makes Chiron feel as though he's inferior and someone who deserves to be picked on, thus increasing his own status relative to Chiron's. Even as children, the boys have a tendency to compete with each other. Listen to what Kevin tells young Chiron in this following clip.
Why you always letting people pick on you, man?
What you mean?
You always letting them pick on you.
So, what I gotta do?
All you gotta do, show these niggas you ain't soft.
But I ain't soft.
I know. But it don't mean nothing if they don't know. Come on. You want these fools to pick on you every day?
Kevin's implying that Chiron lets people pick on him, like he's doing it voluntarily. His argument is that Chiron appears to be soft, so in order to make people stop picking on him, he has to actively project this image of power and authority. In other words, even as children, the male characters in Moonlight feel the need to not be inferior, displaying how men believe they need to assert their dominance in some form, lest someone else establish superiority over them. The men in each film all demonstrate a competitive nature with each other. Sometimes they want to appear more dominant than they might actually be, and other times they want to be perceived as more powerful or of greater status than other men. Not only is this evidence of toxic masculinity, but it also hints at a greater problem: the normalization of men having to establish themselves as something that they're not. In Y Tu Mamá También and Moonlight, toxic masculinity is characterized by three main components. 1. Extreme violence, which we saw through the male character's aggressive and sometimes cruel actions. 2. Degrading attitudes of women, which was visible through the demeaning terms men used to refer to women, and also through the over-sexualization of women in both films. And 3. The need for men to be competitive with each other, which we saw in how the characters belittled each other and tried to make themselves give off this impression of higher status or authority. Now, I've proved to you how each film exhibits toxic masculinity, but you might be thinking, so what? Why does this matter? I mentioned in the beginning that cinema is a reflection of society, and that holds true because in society, there are indeed men that are needlessly violent like Terrell, or view women as objects for sex like Julio and Tenoch do. Now, imagine you had a child. Would you want them growing up with violence as their first reaction to anything gone wrong, or for them to brag about the amount of girls they've slept with while being in a relationship? Needless to say, these examples are on the more extreme end of the spectrum, and I'm using them to exaggerate the idea that toxic masculinity is harmful, not just for men, but society in general. They're poisonous stereotypes and expectations for men that set our society back by decades. And they don't just affect men, but women as well, who help to perpetuate these norms, intentionally or not. My point is not that men are bad. In fact, men are quite capable of good. But I think it's important to push men away from the harmful ideas behind toxic masculinity. Because, as it stands, what is sometimes portrayed as the norm for masculinity has become an excuse for inhumanity, insensitivity, and degradation. Thank you.